One thing I've never really liked about the manosphere has been the degree and amount of prescriptivism that is rampant in that space. Now, in this sense, I align very strongly with the late, great Barbarossa, who talked about a man's life being his own. It's his life to do with as he wishes. Now, these days, the manosphere is very difficult to pin down because it's composed of the gods only know how many factions. It's pretty insane. But even in the earliest days, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a fair bit of prescriptivism going on there, and it was very noticeable. Most of the time it came from the tradcon types, the traditionalists who thought that men should be men and do as men have always done. But there's also always been a different variant of that as well, and that's the kind of prescriptivism you'll hear from gurus. And these are mostly men who will tell you to do as they do because they are, allegedly at least, incredibly successful and worth emulating. And perhaps coincidentally, many times, they also have something to sell you, a package, some kind of course, a book, and all these things are meant to teach you how to be a real man. And it just turns out in these cases that the real man is that guy, that particular guru in the manosphere. And in addition to the traditionalists, those guys exist as well. In great abundance, in fact. But if you think about it, it's not very surprising that the manosphere is filled with these types of people, in particular with the traditionalists, because the way things are these days, with ideologies such as feminism, with the culture war, with how society in general has gone topsy-turvy, it's kind of the exact opposite, the polar opposite of what traditionalists always wanted to have in society, and more importantly, in their own lives. So when traditionalists become part of the manosphere, it's often the case that they didn't get what they wanted in real life because society simply didn't allow for it. It just wasn't a thing anymore, and they weren't able to make it work. But they all still like preaching prescriptivism and how men should behave like men and be like men and blah, 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 for a variety of reasons, not least of which because they're generally not very thoughtful or nuanced people, the traditionalist types within the manosphere. And then you have the prescriptivism of the gurus, and that's explained basically by ego. These are guys who are trying to puff themselves up, push themselves up, and tell other men to live like they do, because that sort of action reinforces their own ego and their own sense of purpose and place in the world. And they're just desperate to convey a sense of self-importance to others that they probably ultimately are not sure about when it comes to themselves. And thus, if they get enough people on board to do as they do, they feel secure and assured in their doubts. It's kind of the same thing that you see sometimes with religion and various cults. The more converts you get, the more reassured you feel in your own belief, that sort of thing. And it has the added benefit, of course, when people buy into their malarkey, that they make a profit off of it. These are, broadly speaking, the two types of prescriptivism you'll find in the manosphere. And I want to tell you why it's all a bunch of BS and why it's not worth listening to, ultimately. Now, you might say this is prescriptive, saying don't listen to this, but ultimately, I don't have any prescriptions other than to live your own life as best as you can, on your own terms. To illustrate this point, I want to tell you the story about a man called Pat Tillman. Now, some of you are older in the audience will almost certainly remember Pat Tillman, especially if you're from the United States. Those of you who are millennials or Zoomers probably have no idea, because many of you were children, or in some cases, you might not even have been born yet. Pat Tillman, who you can see in the thumbnail, by the way, was the spitting image of the all-American boy graduated to man. He had it all. He had looks, he had a wife, close friends and family, and a promising career in the NFL, the National Football League, playing for the Arizona Cardinals at the time. And he was also deeply, deeply patriotic. And so after 9/11, when he heard the clarion calls of George Bush in the fires of the hyped-up patriotism, which definitely was a thing in the wake of 9/11, to both invade Afghanistan and then later Iraq being on completely false pretenses, Pat Tillman, the all-American guy, the guy with the promising NFL career, the looks, the wife, everything you could really dream of as an American male, decided to enlist in the military. And he enlisted in the U.S. Army because he thought it was the right thing to do. He was going to take the fight to the enemy. It's important to remind you, this guy had everything going for him. He was a professional NFL player. He was tall. He was very good looking. He had a doting wife that he had newly married. He had tons of friends, a family that loved him more than anything else. And he threw it all away to enlist in the army, and more specifically to fight in Iraq and later in Afghanistan. And here's the punchline, the sad punchline I should add. Pat Tillman died in service in Afghanistan. Pat Tillman did not die in service in Afghanistan to enemy fire. He didn't die fighting the evil Taliban. He died, it was ascertained later, to friendly fire. He was killed by accident by his own servicemen in Afghanistan. And fast forward over 20 years later, and you know the rest of it, the U.S. and Allied forces pulled out of Afghanistan, finally recognizing it to be a losing war. And guess who rules Afghanistan now? Well, the Taliban, just like they did 30 years ago. Now, of course, Pat Tillman, who was killed by friendly fire in Afghanistan, didn't completely throw his life away because he got a bunch of medals, posthumously, of course, from the U.S. military. And I'm sure those medals that he posthumously received really helped out his friends, family, his wife back at home. I'm sure they were very pleased and happy about that. But this guy really was the poster child of the American dream, of everything that a lot of people think Americans embody. He wasn't a nobody, and he certainly wasn't, in his view, fighting for a lost cause. Listen to his relationships with the people around him. Tillman was very close to his family and high school friends. He repeatedly mentioned in his personal journals during wartime service that he drew strength from and deeply valued his closest friendships, parents, wife, and family. Tillman was very committed to his high school sweetheart, Mary Ugenti, whom he married shortly before his enlistment in the Army. He was also very close with his brother, Kevin, who enlisted with and served alongside him. He was a promising professional football player. He had the looks. He was going to make lots of money. But instead, at age 28, he was killed in service by his own fellow Americans by accident, as proven recently by the fact that the U.S. has withdrawn from Afghanistan and ceded the country back to the Taliban, the evil, horrible Taliban that they were so intent on fighting. Why am I talking about this guy? Again, he's the poster child for everything American. He's also the poster child for the prescriptivist route in life. He did what he thought was the right thing to do. And you could say, well, he died by his principles. Okay. He had such an amazing life waiting for him, presumably. And instead, he died in the dump hole mountains of Afghanistan by friendly fire. The thing about posthumous medals is that they're posthumous. You don't get them when you're still alive. And he doesn't get to live his life. He could have spent the next 15 years in the NFL having an amazing career, having a family with his wife, and just having a good time. But he threw it away because it was the quote-unquote right thing to do. This is the problem with prescriptivism. Prescriptivism emerges because, on average, human beings display certain tendencies. That's especially true of the sexes, of men and women. So on average, yes, men tend towards certain things. They are more interested in things rather than people. They're less likely to talk about their emotions and feelings. They're more likely to take action, all these things. And so the expectations that have built up over millennia are due to these genetic inclinations that men have. Of course, not all men are like this. There are always exceptions. This is their exceptional women every now and then. That's not really the point. The fact that we have these expectations and prescriptions of both men and women is the result of evolved behavior. But the problem is, operating off of your evolved behavior now can lead you to a Pat Tillman incident. And most of us will never have lives as amazing or rich as Pat Tillman. Most of us will never even come close to that. But guess what? It's still your life. It's still your life to live. And why on earth would you listen to people in the world, online, expectations of society? It's not just the manosphere, it's all of society. To do certain things when you get almost nothing for it. Again, what did Pat Tillman win? Most people have forgotten him. He didn't get anything. And he lost out on an incredibly promising life because this guy was the poster child for everything most Americans strive for. He had the looks, the career, the wife, amazing friends and family waiting for him, and he was a patriot, and he got nothing for it. Now recently, Rehab Room, the Lord of Black Pills, brought up in a video the fact that Ukrainian men are trying to desert in Ukraine, even dressing up as women to escape. Meanwhile, their female counterparts, their sisters, their mothers, their girlfriends, are enjoying lives of luxury and peace in Western countries such as the UK, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland. And I want to confirm that. I have seen many Ukrainian women here in Germany. I've talked to several in other countries such as the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Switzerland. And yes, they are having nice lives, whilst their brothers, cousins, boyfriends, husbands are being sent to the slaughter. For what? Traditionalist BS only works when it's not BS. And let's be honest, men have always been fodder for war. It's always been the case. We are the expendable sex. That will never change. But at least back in the day, there was at least the pretense, the illusion that everyone at least nominally bought into, that men's sacrifices, that men's actions meant something. And so if they were to throw away their lives and act as prescriptions demanded of them, they would be rewarded, if not in this life, then at least in the next life. All of that is off the table. Nobody gives a damn about you. And to be honest these days, I think you'll be lucky if you give a damn about yourself. All these people saying, you live a traditional life, do this, do that, conform to the expectations of women, of society, of your favorite online guru. It's all BS. You're probably never going to have a life as nice and fine as the life that Pat Tillman potentially might have had. But it's still your life. And his story is illustrative of the fact that you can throw it all away for nothing. Yes, I'm going to say it here. Pat Tillman died for nothing. And that point is proven and reified by the fact that the U.S. and Allied forces left Afghanistan. Everything that he, quote-unquote, died for, all the time, effort, money spent, everything that went into that waste of a war, it's all gone now. The Taliban is back. So next time you hear people online telling you need to act like a real man and do certain things in your life, and that's how you'll achieve success, Pat Tillman did all the right things. And even if you don't go to war, and you follow the sage advice, and you take all the right steps, there's a good chance that it's not going to work out anyway. It's never very appealing to tell people that they need to figure out stuff on their own, but they kind of do. Oftentimes, the manosphere has talked about how women are more conformist, and that's true. On average, women are more conformist, but that doesn't mean that men are not conformist. Most men have no idea what they're doing with their lives, and they need a blueprint, which is why these gurus out there are so effective, and why the tradcons within the manosphere and elsewhere are so effective, because they just want to be told what to do. They're not thinking for themselves. Yes, on average, they're less likely to conform than women. They're less herd creatures. So what? They're still very conformist by themselves. Yes, men are very conformist by themselves. They want a blueprint. They want to be told what to do. They need that type of instruction, because God forbid what happens when they're left to their own devices. And we see these own devices these days. We see it in prawn addiction. We see it with inkwells. We see it with lookism. We see it with all these things. These are signs that men are lost, because the systems that were in place don't work anymore, and they haven't in a long time. And despite all of that, they're still looking for that blueprint because they can't think for themselves. So if there's any takeaway from this video, learn to think for yourself. Find out what works for you. Nothing is promised to you in this world, and nobody gives a damn about you, so you'll be lucky if you care about yourself. Because I guarantee you, all those people out there, the world, society, gurus, people online, YouTubers, they don't care about you. They're telling you this stuff for the sake of their own glory, for their own egos, and their own wallets. So in an abstract sense, I enjoin you, don't pull a Pat Tillman. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. You guys are absolutely the best, the lifeblood of the channel. Without you, this channel absolutely could not exist. Every contribution you make is extremely appreciated. As for everybody else, if you can engage in the usual YouTube jazz, that would be appreciated too. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.